Chapter 19 of Rebecca's War, The Plan. True to his word, the Honorable Frederick did report it, and Rebecca was called in and questioned, first by Mr. Galloway, and then by Mr. Cunningham, the provost-marshal. But she knew nothing, and they had to let her go. Her escorts were enjoined to keep a closer watch than ever, but the dragoons had no trouble communicating with her. One day in mid-April a man detained her shadow in conversation. Another gestured Rebecca to turn the next corner, and when she did, a third fell into step beside her. He was garbed like a broad-brim, and kept theeing and dying in a paternal fashion, while she poured out her information in a whisper. "God bless thee, child," he said, and parted from her with a wink 8 seconds before her escort came hurrying around the corner. At April's end they found a wholly new way. Their messenger walked right up to the front door and knocked. Rebecca opened it and nearly jumped out of her skin. "Teddy!" The old Indian grinned from ear to ear, enjoying her astonishment. "Afternoon, Miss Becky." But... Then she remembered that he was a privateersman, and as such liable to be seized, and sent to the New York hulks. She slipped out of the house and drew him around to the side yard. "The house is full of King's officers." "So they told me at Valley Forge." "You were but I don't... Teddy, where are Father and Will?" "At sea. Look, it's quite simple. We put in at Charleston last fall, delivered the messages and refitted, spent the winter taking prizes in the Antilles, then headed north. Your father was getting pretty anxious about you by then, especially knowing that young scamp Tom had run off. So we put in at Boston, and he sent me down here with some money for you." "But Valley Forge?" "Well, I stopped off there to see young Tom, and when—" "You saw him? You actually saw Tom?" "Yes. Looked a mite peaked. They hadn't been eating so well up there, but in good health." That was certainly marvelous news. "When they heard the name Ransom," Teddy resumed, "they sent me to Captain McLean, and he explained a few matters. So I'm here with the latest message, namely, the gold transfer goes through as scheduled, but you will be a decoy to lead the British captain astray." It was all coming across too fast for Rebecca. "Come into the kitchen, Teddy. That's family territory. The cellar and garret are for us, the parlor and the second floor are the Army's, and the dining room is neutral. But don't say anything dangerous in front of Ursula." "I know." "And speaking of dangerous, should you be seen around here at all? The Tories have been busily paying off old scores all winter by denouncing active rebels to the provost-marshal." He shrugged. "Unless you're actually caught in the act, it's hard to prove privateering. I'm safe enough. But is there somewhere where we can talk without being overheard?" In the end, they sneaked up to the garret unseen, and Teddy sat on the broken old chair that had been serving the Ransoms as a clothes horse, and told Rebecca the plan that had been worked out. In its own way, it was as cluttered as the Mischianza. There were to be 3 groups, the captain's, Teddy's, and Rebecca's. The captain was to lead his men in a showy attack on the line that would throw confusion into the British, timing it, they hoped, for the hour at which the boat carrying Teddy was rowing back up the river with the gold. Teddy, coaxing a crew of Colonel Glover's Marbleheaders, those fighting small boatmen who last year ferried Washington's troops across the Delaware 3 times in 4 days, was in charge of removing the gold. "It's a lucky thing I happened along," the old man commented dryly. "They might have had trouble finding the tunnel from the river end. It's tarnation well concealed." If there were still a sentry at that end, they'd have to deal with him in silence, because the ships on the river were sure to retain at least skeleton crews. Then up into the house, deal with whomever they found, remove the gold to the boat as fast as possible. Wait till they heard the noise of the attack, then push off and row like blazes. Rebecca knew who whomever would be Fitch. Despite his rigidity in matters of social conduct, she didn't want him battered about. "When you say deal with," she asked uneasily, "do you mean kill?" "Not if we don't have to. Too noisy for one thing. Probably clap a pistol to the head, then gag and bind. You can release them when you get back." I see. Where exactly am I going? To the brandy catch. Yes, Miss Becky, I'm afraid the brandy has to go. Captain McLean thinks this Cargill man's greed has happened along too opportunely for us to waste. But how will I even get there? They'll never let me through the lines at night. And besides, I don't know that I like traveling up back roads after dark with all that militia prowling around. Well, we're assuming you'll have a corporal's guard on your trail and under the command of an officer. I don't think harm will come to you. How will you arrange that? For the first time, Teddy looked uncertain. We have to leave a great deal of this part up to you. You have got to get some kind of transportation, a chaise or a cart or something, and you have to get a man to help you. That's only for the look of things. It has to seem that you're doing this on your own. Devil of it is, you have to let the Cargill man find out what you're up to without letting it seem that that's what you're doing. Rebecca pondered, fighting the abused feeling that they were leaving all the hard part up to her. The transportation was easy enough. She could borrow the Honorable Frederick's chariot and one of his horses. He wouldn't need it that night because the Mischianza guests were to travel by water, and she'd seen Park and hitch it up often enough to know how. But the man to help her, that wasn't so easy. Could she borrow a servant as well as the equipage? Openly, that is. The Honorable Frederick was generous and his men underworked, and he had remained honorably neutral in the matter of the brandy as he had promised. But she was afraid to bring him into it. He was going to start asking himself why she was removing the brandy at all, and when it was already in a place that Captain Cargill couldn't find, especially since he himself had warned her of his colleague's intentions. And from there, knowing her spy connections, it would be an easy step to, distract the attention move. And once he'd gotten that far, the house would be filled with soldiers diligently hunting. No, the Honorable Frederick had to be kept as far out of this business as possible. Why can't McLean supply me a man? They're all going to be needed for his attack. To succeed, it has to be a mighty bold one on several points of the line at once. But there's a whole army up there. Yes, but an army would have to be told why this is so important, and too many people are in on the secret already. Rebecca sighed. They were probably right, but oh dear, whom else did she know? Mr. Welling? No, he'd have no part in something shady and dangerous. Perhaps Ursula had some acquaintance among the German community who could be trusted, or... And suddenly she thought, Stowe! Ah, you've got something. You've thought of something, Teddy said, smiling. I knew old Tom Ransom's granddaughter wouldn't be stumped for long. I'm not sure, said Rebecca, examining her idea from several angles. But I think the man I have in mind may be the solution to the whole thing. It all depended on whether or not Stowe could be bribed. If he could, if he took her money and played it straight, he would still have his uses, of course. But if he couldn't, if he spurned her money and reported the incident to his master, they were home free. Because Cargill would undoubtedly curse the man out for a fool and tell him to go right back and agree to help. Then, knowing what they had in mind, he would, she was pretty sure, see to it that they managed to get through the lines somehow. It seemed delightfully appropriate to use Captain Cargill's servant on this second brandy expedition. After all, they had used his coat on the first. The Mischianza was set for May 18th, a Monday, which meant that she had less than 3 weeks to prepare for her part in this complex plot. She had best sound Stowe out as soon as possible, in case it didn't work out with him at all and they had to find someone else. Leaving Teddy, she hurried downstairs and found the Batman in the kitchen with Ursula, in the act of sponging and pressing his master's coat. He gave her his timid, bobbing little bow, and then didn't seem to know whether he ought to go on with his work or not. Stowe, I have to talk to you privately. Will you come out into the garden with me for a moment? Me, miss? Why, whatever about? But he followed her up the steps to the side yard where the cabbage roses were in leaf, and the buds were swelling on the crabapple tree. Rebecca drew in a long breath of spring before turning briskly to the business at hand. Listen, Stowe, would you like to earn 5 guineas? Oh, miss, I can't have nothing to do with helping them prisoners. Why, my gentleman would have me striped raw at the halberds if I was to help you feed the rebels. It has nothing to do with the prisoners. I just want you to help me move something. And I thought, well, Ursula likes you and says you're the best of the lot, and it made me think maybe you'd help me out. He stared at her with round, fearful eyes. Move something? Yes, it's too heavy for just me. Now, was he too stupid to guess what she meant? Right now, miss? No, you see, it's kind of a secret. I mean, if everybody knew I had this thing, I might get robbed. So I thought I'd wait till Mischianza night. His mouth went round with an O, but no sound came out. He knew what she meant, all right. I'd have to think about that, miss. You're not to tell anyone, she cautioned him. If you do, I'll deny it, and you'll know they'll always take a civilian's word over a soldier's. I'll not talk, miss. Especially not to your master, do you understand? Yes, miss, but he evaded her eyes as he said that. She parted from him with an anxious but hopeful heart and reported the conversation to Teddy. From the dormer window, 10 minutes later, they saw Stowe leave the house and head furtively for the 3 Crowns. Oh, by the way, where's the Franklin letter? Teddy asked her as they waited for the Batman to return. Still, and he pointed at the floor. She nodded. But if Fitch is out, I could probably get at it unobserved. I think you'd better try. She slipped down the ladder and stood in the second-floor hall. Since the captain started being up and about, they no longer kept a sentry outside his chamber door, and a quick peek into Mother's room revealed that it was empty. Downstairs the front door opened, and she heard the voices of the Honorable Frederick and Lieutenant Younghusband. They lingered a moment, chatting. The captain still walked with difficulty and needed an assisting arm to mount stairs. She had plenty of time to dash in and get the letter long before he could make it to the second floor, even if he started immediately. She nipped in and bent over the drawer. The blankets were gone, donated to the army during that call-up last fall. Well, now was not the time to speculate. The captain and the lieutenant were starting up the stairs. She reached in for the first sheet, and a hand was laid on her shoulder. She gasped. "Is there anything with which I can assist you, miss?" said Fitch from far overhead. The door to his little closet room stood open, revealing where he had been. I remembered a letter," she stammered. "I tried to find it once before." "I see. But I can assure you, miss, there is no letter in that or any other drawer, for I have turned them out myself." Oh. Her nerve was returning. I wish I could find it." She smiled at him weakly and left the room just as Younghusband and Town toiled up the last few steps. She was greeted and bobbed to them, but hurried off up the ladder stairs before she could be detained in conversation. She explained to Teddy what had happened, but she did not consider that she had made a serious lapse, and only went over to the chimney out of habit. She put her ear to the brickwork just in time to hear Fitch finish telling his master about finding her at the drawer. A moment of silence. Then the Honorable Frederick's voice. "Deuce take me, Younghusband. There's something about that drawer. The first time I saw the child she was going through it. She told me a perfectly plausible story, so I accepted it. But now, draw it out for me, there's a good fellow." Teddy had joined her at the chimney, drawn by the consternation on her face. His own slowly turned ashen as they listened. "By Jove, there is something. See how shallow the inside is compared with the outside? False bottom. There must be a spring catch of some sort. Here, perhaps? The edges are most likely to be... Aha!" The thunk was clearly audible. "Oh, Teddy," she whispered. He put out a hand and gripped her shoulder. "Let me see now, an account book. To 1 pair Calamanco shoes, 7 and 6 pence. No, that wasn't what she went to all this trouble for. Here's something that looks like the letter she was describing. More letters. Letters! What appears to be a crude map of some kind. Ah, it's in code." He laughed like a small boy. Depend upon it, young husband, this is what the minx was after. What do you think it's a map of, sir? Buried treasure? Perhaps the old man was a pirate in good earnest. More likely buried contraband. Last autumn I should have said the location of the brandy, but that's been moved, and she was still anxious to get hold of this, so... Well, from what she's told me, her grandfather might have had any number of secret caches. Let me see. It looks like a simple number cipher referring to book pages. The old man was a seaman. What kind of book would a seaman have handy? A Bible, sir? Perhaps. Or Norrie's epitome of seamanship. Give me the map, sir, young husband cried light-heartedly. I'll ask one of the naval officers to lend us the volumes we will need. We will have this deciphered in no time. There was a short pause, while Rebecca bit her thumb till the skin nearly broke. She'd made a mess of it at last. On the eve of the rescue, at the very last moment, her stupid carelessness had blown the whole precious secret. She couldn't bow out of this one, blame it on Will or anyone else. She and no one else had cost her embattled country its desperately needed gold. Chapter 20. Mischianza Night. Then the captain said slowly, I think not. Not? But why, sir? We found it fairly. The girl has given us a jolly good run with a number of checks, but now it's time for the kill. No, young husband, a game is a game and all, but this, it smacks too much of theft and prying. The girl is an arch-rebel, sir, she and all her tribe. The girl is a child. Oh, come, sir, a half-grown girl, and artful beyond her years, what's more. She is quick-witted, I quite agree. She also has pluck, and I like both qualities, and I won't see her robbed. A child of the people, the lieutenant grumbled. Well, and what of it? She doesn't know her place. No, the captain agreed thoughtfully, she doesn't. But, do you know, Dickon, I like that about her, too. It's what makes her easy to talk to. Rebecca had begun to breathe again. He always was rather a darling, she whispered. Billeting men on the population, necessary though it is in a war of this sort, is bad enough. Poking and prying into their private secrets, that seems to me caddish. We ferreted out the secret of the drawer, now let's be decent and put it back. The lieutenant young husband made an exasperated sound. At least, sir, let me give it to her in person. I think you owe me that much revenge. The Honorable Frederick laughed and agreed, and when Rebecca saw Stowe returning and went down to get his answer, the lieutenant stopped her on the stair. "Ah, there you are, Miss Ransom," he said down the length of what seemed a very long nose. "I am instructed by my captain to give you these, which appear to have been found under the false bottom of a drawer in his bedchamber." She did not need to pretend agitation, for as he handed over the wad of paper, she saw that the Franklin letter had slipped halfway out of its disguising cover, and the words "to Mr. Robert Morris, Esquire," leaped out at her. "Thank you, Lieutenant," she stammered, and thrust them hastily under her apron as she continued down the stairs. Stowe agreed to help her. "Good," she said. "Now all I need is a pass to get us through the lines." "Oh, miss, passes come that hard." "Well, I thought you could get me a sample, and then I could forge one." "Forge one?" He acted shocked. "Forgery's a hanging offense, miss." "Not in Pennsylvania." He appeared to ponder. "Look here, miss, meaning no offense. Wouldn't you do better to ask for a real one? Wait till the night come, and then tell them you have a sick person to see." "A sick person? Would they let me through the lines just for that?" "A young lady they would. No harm in letting a girl out on an errand of mercy, you might say." Rebecca didn't like putting it off until the night, leaving that much unsettled. But she couldn't be 100% certain that he had in fact betrayed her. Still, if he had, that was evidently the story he and Cargill had agreed on, and she would have to go along with it. "All right, that's what we'll do," she said. So Teddy slipped out out of the house, taking the telltale letter and map with him back to Valley Forge, and the great conspiracy was launched. The first week in May, a sergeant and 3 privates showed up at the front door, doffed their hats, and asked was it convenient, miss, for them to remove the pier glasses this morning. Rebecca stood by nervously for what she would say to her father if they were damaged in such service she simply dared not think, as the gummy pieces were carried out and laid in a straw-filled cart. At least the soldiers seemed careful and responsible. Well, she had agreed to the loan, and there was no sense in worrying until she knew she had to. After that, tension and excitement mounted to a fever pitch. On May 8th, Sir Henry Clinton arrived from New York, and 3 days later took command of the army. The officers seemed not too happy about that. Clinton was a short, cold, prissy sort, rather aloof, and not at all like the affable, pleasure-loving Howe or the energetic Cornwallis, who was popular even with the men. "Reared in the colonies, I believe," said Lieutenant's young husband with distaste. And the Honorable Frederick offered a staff position, diplomatically turned it down. 1 week later, in line with his promise, the Honorable Frederick drove the 3 Ransoms out to Walnut Grove in his chariot, and waited while they explored. It was a far cry from the abandoned estate where she and Amelia had gathered walnuts last fall. The plain old Quaker house could not at first be seen from the immense new structures. The open stands from which the spectators would view the tilt, the triumphal arches set at either end of a 300-foot avenue, one to Lord Howe adorned with naval trophies, the other to Sir William, bearing military honors, the vast pavilion which had been divided into reception rooms, card rooms, ball rooms, supper rooms, withdrawing rooms, and alcoves. It was all empty, of course, except for a few ill-at-ease sentries. The walls were painted with festoons of flowers and cornucopias, Neptunes, and plumes, all very pretty at first glance, and doubtless magical by candlelight. But in daylight you could see the gimcrackery, and Rebecca, peeking out a window at the Wharton house, wondered what poor old Joseph Wharton would say if he could see it. The most magnificent room where a sentry opened for them was the supper room, 200 feet long and over 20 feet high, and there the Ransoms found their piered glasses, decked with green silk ribbon and artificial flowers. "Oh, look, Rebecca, are those our glasses?" "Those are our glasses, aren't they?" Amelia trilled. "Don't they look pretty? I wish they looked that pretty at home." "Yes, those are ours," she sighed, letting her sister babble. Gimcrackery or no, she wished she were going to see it. She wished she were going to spend the evening dancing in a white silk polonaise with a knight in black and orange, instead of driving out with Stowe into some dark old country road and having Cargill follow and pounce on her and probably swear. It plain wasn't fair. She'd been good all winter long, hadn't she? Carting brandy around and not letting anyone find out about the gold, and taking care of the family. And what had Peggy Chew done? Nothing but go to assembly balls. But Peggy was getting to be a knight's lady while Rebecca's lot was to be a decoy. There just wasn't any justice. "Well, my hearties, did you enjoy it?" their host asked when they dragged themselves away. "No," Rebecca snapped and settled down to brood. "Cheer up, my dear. Perhaps next year there will be another pageant, even better." He slapped the reins, and off they went. They had scarcely felt the city pavement under their wheels before the Honorable Frederick was hailed and halted by a mounted officer. It was Colonel Ogilvy. He nodded courteously but distractedly to Rebecca. "I say, Town, have you heard the news?" "News? No, sir." Colonel cast a curious glance at Rebecca, and she was about to say, "We'll walk the rest of the way and leave them to their privacy." But he didn't wait for that. "The Americans have signed a treaty with the French, a full military, commercial, and diplomatic alliance." The captain gave a long, incredulous gasp. "They can't have done! They wouldn't! Why, France has been our common enemy for 100 years. "Surely you knew that they had agents in Paris. This chap Franklin? Negotiating with the Virgins. Yes, of course, but, well, it seemed more like an artful ploy than serious diplomacy. A sword held over our heads. I can't believe the Americans have actually allied themselves with Versailles. Nevertheless, the information comes from unimpeachable sources. There is talk, the colonel said, again with a glance at Rebecca, of canceling the entertainment tonight. It was Rebecca's turn to gasp. They can't! They wouldn't! She managed not to do it out loud, but she was far from certain that she had kept consternation off her face. Of course, the news about the treaty was marvelous, glorious, but she had too many immediate worries to sit around and rejoice. She could picture Teddy and the Marbleheaders rowing right into the midst of an aroused officer corps. But it was a false alarm after all, for the colonel added, but they feel that things have gone too far now to cancel. All the same, I expect it will look rather bad at home, sir, the Honorable Frederick said uneasily, a military triumph and pageant on the very heels of this development. Yes, pity. He nodded again to Rebecca and rode off, and she said wonderingly, "What does it mean? Is the war over?" "Nothing, Rebecca," he slapped the reins. "Nothing has changed at all." "Something has. Eh? That's the first time I've heard a king's officer call us the Americans." But this news served only to make the company more determinedly gay than ever. The Honorable Frederick even light-heartedly invited the Ransoms to watch him finish dressing for the occasion, for it was to be their first glimpse of him in uniform. When they arrived, he was standing before his glass, buckling his black velvet stock. Except for that and a black hair ribbon on his queue, he was dressed in white from head to toe. White wig elegantly curled and dressed, white shirt with a positive foam of point d'Alençon at throat and wrists, trim white waistcoat, white doeskin breeches, white silk stockings. "You're blinding me, sir," said Rebecca. "Oh, he's beautiful, Rebecca. Don't you think he's beautiful, Rebecca? Peter, don't you?" But Peter was jealous. "No," he said mulishly, "he doesn't even have a beaver hat." Even on his feet and fully erect, the Honorable Frederick did not loom very large. He had a couple of inches on Rebecca at the moment, but she knew that when she had her full growth, for the Ransoms rather ran to lankiness, she would be considerably taller. Still, he had a slim, compact, wiry build, and with his spiky hair hidden under the silky and glamorous wig, he cut an attractive figure. "Are you going to be dancing, sir?" she asked him. "I dare say I could manage a turn or two, my dear. Ah, the sash." Fitch tied it around his master's middle, about where the bandage was on Germantown night, Rebecca reflected, with a sense of unreality. And that spoiled the all-whiteness. Next came black silver-buckled shoes, scarlet coat with blue lapels for a royal regiment, sword, cocked hat, gloves, gorget. "No cloak, Fitch, I pray you. It's a warm afternoon." "The weather is very changeable, sir, and if you were to take a chill even now, I should not like to answer for the consequences." When the Honorable Frederick threw up his hands and agreed to carry his cloak, Rebecca muttered, "A perfect slave," and he shot her a grin. "Persistent to the end." It's American to be persistent. Her father liked to say that. When the British soldier was resolute, the American was persistent. He gave way under attack, but he came back. And in the end, Captain Ransom maintained persistence would exhaust resolution. Lieutenant Younghusband appeared, similarly attired, except that he wore his own hair powdered. "Ah, there you are, Fritz. Shall we set about it, then?" By twos and threes, the officers and their guests streamed north through the Philadelphia streets, some afoot, others in vehicles, to Knight's Wharf at the foot of Green Street near the fortifications. At 4:30 in the afternoon, the water procession was to begin. Rebecca was beginning to think about what lay ahead of her that night, and to get the shakes. She remembered Christmas Day and how she had shivered to see that only McLean's body stood between her and discovery. Now there would be no one. It all lay in her lap. To take her mind off it, she decided that they would watch the water procession from the Willing Wharf. Come along, Amelia. Peter, let's go out to the wharf. They took the tunnel route. The sentry at the river end nodded to them pleasantly enough. You'll find a proper mob up there, miss, he warned them, but he followed them up the ladder himself. He was right about the crowd. The far end of the wharf was packed tight with spectators. The aged planks squealed and sagged under their weight, and as Rebecca tried to worm her way to the edge where they could see, there was an ominous cracking underfoot. This is no good, she muttered and looked around her. Tied up at the Willings' newer wharf just north of Walnut was the brigantine Quaker Lady. Her father had skippered it once years before, and perhaps that's what put the notion into her head. Come along, she said to the children, and led them down from the rickety old wharf and along King Street to the new one. As she had hoped, the petty officer stationed at the gangway of the Quaker Lady was a man who had shipped under her father and knew her. He hesitated and said he had very strict orders, but in the end he let them come aboard, and even directed a seaman to find a place at the night head from which they had a high unobstructed view. It paid to have nautical relatives. Everyone in Philadelphia, it seemed, had come down to view the procession. Every wharf was crammed, as were the yards and the rigging of the ships and the roofs and windows of buildings along King Street. The Delaware was filled with boats, rowed by men and women hoping to get a closer look, which the proctor and guard boats kept having to shoo away from the processional route. Every ship was decked with flags and bunting, tossing and flapping in the May breeze, and out in the channel the Roebuck, the Camille, the Vigilant, and other king's ships had their gun ports open preparatory to firing salutes. At 4:30 sharp, music struck up from a distant military band, signaling the start. Peter began to jump up and down with excitement, and because she was excited too, Rebecca didn't have the heart to make him stand still. "Oh, look, Rebecca!" Amelia cried. "They're coming! See them? They're coming!" The first division of the procession hove into view, 3 flatboats carrying the band and being rowed, or so it seemed to Rebecca, in time to the music. Behind them came a flotilla of barges, galleys, and boats, filled with brilliantly coated guests and decked with fluttering buntings and streamers of every description. They passed not too far from where the Ransoms were perched, and Rebecca leaned forward trying to distinguish Captain Town. She had brought the old telescope, but it did no good. He melted into the crowd. She was reminded of the Irish tale of the man who finds the leprechaun's pot of gold and marks the pot with the yellow scarf when he goes off to get a spade. When he returns, every tree in the forest has a yellow scarf. There were too many scarlet coats. It made the Honorable Fredericks more them somehow. He had never been us, of course, but had at times seemed almost neutral. It gave Rebecca a very queer feeling. The last of the procession passed, and as they came abreast of Windmill Island, they began to draw closer to shore. Then the salutes began, timed with precision. Puff, recoil, bang! Puff, recoil, bang! The puff and bang came closer and closer together as the salutes neared where the Ransoms were standing, until finally they were simultaneous, and then began to part again as the saluting moved downriver. The regatta, she could see, was disembarking at the Association Battery landing. "Well, that's that," she said with a sigh. More music was playing now from Walnut Grove direction. Was it going to tantalize their ears all night? "Time for supper," said Rebecca. Rebecca had more than her usual difficulty in getting the children to bed down without her. They kept hearing music for a long time, trumpet calls, marches, flourishes. There was an air of festival in the city, too, as though the uninvited were saying, "We don't care, we have our own kind of fun." But at long last Peter dropped off, and then it was safe to leave, for Amelia would not stay awake long by herself. Ursula was not entirely unaware that Rebecca had something planned. There were all those whispered conferences with Stowe, for one thing. But from the way she tried to talk Rebecca out of it, it was plain that she thought she was planning to gate-crash the Mischianza. As Rebecca left the garret bedroom and headed for the ladder, the housekeeper had one last try. "I'm going, and that's that," Rebecca said in exasperation. "Now leave me alone." "Huh! Miss High and Mighty, you find out it's no joke for a young girl out on bad night. No joke at all." She retired to her room with a slam, and Rebecca at long last was free. She had arranged to meet Stowe at the stable as soon as it got dark. Parkin, who slept in the back room, presented a problem. She had been careful to buy some eggs from him earlier in the day, so that he would be equipped for a carouse if he felt like one, and it was Stowe's job to suggest it to the groom in case he didn't think of it independently. But evidently he needed no prompting, for when Rebecca, cloaked and hooded, arrived at the stable, she found only Stowe. Together by the light of Parkin's horn lantern, they threw the harness over the back of one of the horses, fastened buckles and tightened straps, then backed the animal out of his stall and between the shafts of the chariot. With the last buckle in place, Rebecca climbed into the driver's seat and picked up the reins. She had driven once or twice under the Honorable Frederick's eye, and was sure she could manage. "Hop on. We'll go to the main guard to get our pass." Stowe climbed nervously into the passenger's seat, and she turned the horse and drove lurchingly out of the stable and down the street. She was beginning to enjoy herself. But at the main guard she had a renewed attack of nerves. Facing Captain Cargill was never, by any stretch, a prospect to be viewed with joyful anticipation. "Wait here," she said. She climbed the steps, edged past the sentry at the door, and went in. Captain Cargill was there, all right. "Well, what do you want?" he snapped. "A pass, sir, through the lines. My aunt is ill. We've just had word." "Aunt, eh? You once told me you have no relatives closer than Connecticut." "Fancy his remembering that. She's a courtesy aunt, actually, an old friend of my mother." "How did you get word of this illness?" "There's been no one let through the line that I know of. Message came by water." But she was beginning to feel doubtful now. What if, after all, Stowe had not betrayed her? But no, it was all right. The look in his pale orange eyes as he picked up a pen and piece of paper told her that he had just been baiting her, or perhaps playing his role to the hilt. "Do you expect to be home before morning?" he inquired, writing away. "Yes, sir." "How are you traveling?" It had not occurred to her that she might be asked that question, and for a moment she stammered. Then she thought, why not the truth? "I borrowed Captain Towne's equipage. There was no way to ask him, but I know he'd have lent it if he'd been here." He finished writing and handed it over. "Thank you, sir," she said, bobbing, and disappeared with the all-important paper in her hand. "Well, you were right," she said to Stowe, waving the paper. "Yes, miss." She climbed aboard and slapped the reins, and they were off. She took the same route McLean had used on Christmas Day, up 2nd Street, past Christ Church. As they topped the rise at Vine, she pulled the horse up for a moment. "What are you stopping for, miss?" Stowe cried in alarm. "Look, you can see the lights of Walnut Grove, and there goes the first skyrocket. Ooh! Miss, we'd best get on with it. In a minute. Oh, look how beautiful." "Miss, you don't want them suspecting you now, do you?" Yes, duty was duty, but oh, how hard it was to turn her back on those lovely colors, those fountains of light, those flowers bursting into bloom in the night sky, and plod forward into pitch-black countryside. She sighed as she slapped the reins. Here was the guards' encampment, and there was Camping Town, and now they were coming to a barricade. The port sentry advanced his firelock. "Who comes there?" "Friend. Here's my pass from the captain of the day." "1 minute, miss." He held it under the lantern at the side of the vehicle and laboriously spelled out the words, lip moving. Then as he handed it back, he caught sight of Stowe. "Ain't you on duty, mate? This here is signed by your gentleman, so by rights you should be on the main guard tonight." Stowe looked at Rebecca with round, helpless eyes, and inwardly she smiled. He hadn't been in the deceit and skullduggery business as long as she had, and naturally he was less skilled. The captain give me the night off duty like," he said lamely. The sentry shook his head. "Don't know, mate. It don't sound like the Captain Cargill I'd recognize." "Well, I'll move the barrier." She passed through, aware of the great projecting fingers of abatis that studded the earth walls of the fortification, and turned up the Frankfurt road as McLean had done. By now, she thought Teddy must be in the house and McLean readying his attack. She crossed Gunner's Run, then turned off onto the parallel road. Behind her, Stowe gave a kind of squeak, "So that's why we couldn't find it" sound, and for her own amusement, she asked him what he had said. "Nothing, miss," but she noticed he kept peering back at the road they had just left. Suppose Cargill missed the turn-off. Well, that was no skin off Rebecca's nose. All she had to do was get him out of the city. But there, Stowe was secretly dropping something to reveal the route they had taken. The captain had probably supplied his Batman with rags or ribbons to mark their route. That way he could allow her to get a long head start and have the brandy half removed and unconcealable when he arrived. Now, if only McLean had done as he was supposed to and marked the turn-off for her. She wasn't sure she could find it even in broad daylight, and this night was inky black. But suddenly, by the light of the chariot's lantern, she saw the agreed-upon marker, an old tavern sign, the pipe and bowl lying on the ground. She turned the horses. "Here, miss, there's no—" But the protest died on Stowe's lips as the shrubbery parted before them and twin ruts appeared faintly on the ground ahead. A few minutes later they were at the clearing. Rebecca woed the horse, climbed down, and tied the reins to a piece of shrubbery. "The stuff is over here," she said, leading the way to the root cellar and shoving aside the vines that covered it. There were 3 kegs left. Stowe tried to stall and stretch out the task, but even so it took him only a few minutes to carry them to the chariot. He was getting more and more jumpy, and while Rebecca laboriously turned the chariot around, he stood biting his nails and openly peering down the road. "Hop in," she said. "I'm afraid you'll have to sit on top of the kegs." Miss, wasn't you wanting something more done?" "No, that's it, except for unloading, of course. Why?" "Well, this little bit of hauling now, that don't seem like much for 5 guineas, miss." "All right," she agreed mischievously. "We'll make it 3. He wasn't very happy, but he had to climb aboard and sit with legs dangling while they jounced and rocked their way back to the highway. There, she turned away from the city and prepared to keep driving until Captain Cargill overtook her. But as it happened, that was not for long, because she had scarcely driven a mile when the drum of hoofs on the roadway sounded behind her. Someone shouted, "Halt!" And in a moment they were surrounded by dust, thrashing animal legs, the smell of sweating horses, and wild confusion. The chariot horse reared between the shafts, whinnying in protest, and nearly jerked Rebecca from her seat. Then one dark figure reached out from his own dancing animal to seize its cheek strap and jerk it to a halt. "Here," she cried, playing her part. "What's the meaning of this? I have a pass from the captain of the—" She broke off as another dark figure dismounted and appeared in the full light of the chariot's lantern. So Miss Nip wasn't as smart as she thought, eh? "Captain Cargill!" It was easy enough to sound feeble and caught out. "Dead right. And what have we in these 3 interesting containers, eh? Why, they might almost be brandy kegs, mightn't they?" He was grinning. She'd never known him to smile before. He had, she noticed, very white teeth. Those are mine. You've no right to them." "No right? Ha ha! We'll soon see about that." "Very well, Stowe, you've done your part admirably. Now take charge of the girl. Flowers." He went on distributing orders to a horseman he'd brought as an escort, while Rebecca stole a glance at Stowe. "I'm sorry, miss," the Batman whispered. "So you should be," she said tartly. "Well, you think you're going to collect any 5 guineas for this night's work? You can think again." "Yes, miss." "Leading me on, pretending to help, and all the while—" But her heart wasn't in scolding him, and when one of the horsemen under orders tied his own mount to the rear of the chariot and took over the coachman's seat, they ordered her to sit on the kegs with Stowe, and she took her place in silence, and rode in silence, ignoring both the Batman and his master, who could not resist taunting her, as the little procession headed back toward Philadelphia. But even Captain Cargill was silenced by the sight that greeted them as they rounded the bend in the Frankfurt road and came in full view of the fortifications, a sheet of flame.